At this stage of our learning journey, hopefully you have developed a basic understanding of the Django migration cycle, having grasped the foundational concepts and procedures involved in the Django migration system. The main focus so far has been exploring make migrations, so mastering the make migrations command to generate migration files automatically based on changes made to Django models, streamlining the migration process. In the previous tutorial, at a surface level, we introduced the idea of how Django would generate migration files by inspecting the model, the existing migration files, determining the changes that need to be made, and then automatically generating a migration file. At this point in the course, we could have dedicated more time to exploring the different migration operations. I've decided not to do that because I think it's fairly straightforward. We have already seen an example, and I think I have already explained the basics of this, in that we create a migration file, Django looks for the changes, and then it generates operations in the migration file. And we find that the operations that we need to perform, the changes that we need to perform, they relate to a migration operation. So here we have the different schema operations, and we can read through the general construct or specification of that. And then what we could have done is we could have worked through some examples where we create our own custom migrations utilizing these migration operations. Now, in my opinion, I think that the Django built-in migration framework does a great job at automating much of the basic processes seamlessly. So applying, creating, reverting migrations, and so on. Within that process, of course, it's going to be utilizing these migration operations. Now, by transitioning directly to custom migrations, we naturally delve into more advanced aspects of the migration management. So custom migrations will afford us the opportunity to tailor migration scripts to specific requirements beyond what Django's automatic migrations can provide. Now, through this approach, we will inevitably encounter various migration options and considerations, and no doubt bring in some of the migration operations. And at the same time, I think that's going to allow us to cover a broader spectrum of migration-related concepts and practices. So that's the direction that we're going to take now. In the rest of this tutorial, I want to, first of all, provide a brief introduction to the importance of custom migrations, and then think about when we might want to start to utilize custom migrations, and then finally go ahead and show a basic example of creating a custom migration. Once we have this underpinning knowledge, the next couple of tutorials, we're really kind of focus in on some different custom migration scenarios. Now, somewhere on this scale, we would probably be starting to work with much more larger databases or much more complex databases. So in the context of working with a large-scale database and encountering a complex issue, there will be a decision that we need to make at some point. Do we rely on the Django's built-in migration system, or do we start crafting custom migrations manually? Now, much of that might depend on the type of scenario or the complexity of the task that you're trying to perform. We probably are fully aware at this point that the Django migration system is well equipped at managing a variety of schema changes, but certain alterations or unique demands of the database architecture may call for more personalized solution. So in such scenarios, opting for a custom migration can afford greater precision and control. Now, with that in mind, I think it is also important for us to emphasize and to recognize that the database itself, the database technology, the database server itself also possesses capabilities to perform operations directly on the server. This will offer distinct advantages. Now, to actually harness some of these database-specific capabilities, generally we would be potentially looking at creating custom migrations. Okay, so in Django, the RunSQL operation is a migration operation that allows us to execute raw SQL queries as part of the database migration. So this operation is particularly useful when you need to perform database schema changes or database migrations that cannot be expressed using Django's ORM or built-in migration operations. The RunSQL operation is primarily used then for executing raw SQL queries against the database. So I've gone ahead and I've migrated this project, and I've then gone ahead and created an empty migration. So we're going to find the RunSQL within the operations list. Here we can customize or initiate the RunSQL with migrations.runSQL. And then what we need to do then is specify the SQL that we want to initiate, run in the database, and then alternatively, then the reverse SQL. So here, this is optional. This is going to contain the SQL or the queries to be executed during the migration's reverse operation. So just as an example, in the initial migration, we created this product image table. So let's go ahead and see if we can then now drop it. So just to confirm, the migration has been applied and we have the product image table, the inventory_product image table. So I'll go ahead and add the SQL needed to drop the table. So here we have drop table and then the name of the table, in this case, inventory product image. So if we now go ahead and migrate, it looks like we have applied the migration. And now when we go back into the database, we can see that the table has been dropped. Of course, that was a simple example. We'll look at much more deeper examples in the next tutorials. For that simple example, we could have just run, of course, the delete model migration operation or specified a delete model migration operation. That would maybe have been a more appropriate approach at that point, but hopefully you get the general idea of how to actually utilize the custom or the special operation RunSQL. Now, we didn't include the rollback or reverse SQL. We haven't touched upon rollback yet. We will discuss it later on in this module. But for now, we're just focusing on the actual SQL string to be executed during the migration forward operation. Now, I did mention that we would discuss typical scenarios where we might use the Django custom migration. Now, the surface level answer to this is we would use custom migrations when we want to manage constraints beyond Django's defaults, when we want more granular control and flexibility. The extended answer would lean towards the idea of utilizing custom migrations when trying to enforce unique values across multiple columns, implementing features such as check constraints, and thinking about complex data validation, or as we've already mentioned, when you're trying to leverage any database-specific feature or advanced feature, or potentially where you're integrating with external systems requiring custom constraints. On this last point, so if your Django application interacts with other systems imposing data integrity rules, you might need to mirror those constraints to your database. This could involve replicating complex constraints defined in another database using raw SQL within your migrations. Okay, so to summarize, we could say the purpose and importance of custom migrations is that it allows us to go beyond the Django's default to provide more custom and specific operation, or to apply more custom and specific operations to our database. We've seen that we can leverage the RunSQL method to actually perform raw SQL queries so that we can actually apply these advanced operations on the database. Like I said, next up, we'll take a look at some deeper examples of utilizing RunSQL and think about some scenarios where we would actually need to think about creating custom migrations.